Yeah, the bears there are crazy. We stayed at a house like right there, like on the side of a cliff, like the hills, mountains, whatever you want to call them. And like Christy and I were like sitting in the hot tub, and she's like, "Is that a bear over there?" And I was like, "Yep, that's a bear." Like 10 minutes later, there's like 4 of them, like trying to like down by the door, like trying to come in, like, shut the doors. The next morning, she's like drinking her coffee, like reading her Bible, sitting there, and she looks over, and there's like a little bear cub that crawled up the side, and she's like, "Oh, what the?" Like,
all right, so today on Patriot on Purpose, we've got Chad Metcalf with us, who is a retired Navy SEAL. He is a former pro golfer. He has tackled many things like that. I mean, even in the time period that I've known him, he is an expert carpenter and does some very high-end work there in select situations, and passionate about education, passionate about teaching people how to think and how to perform. And so we're going to dive into all those topics today. But Chad, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Absolutely.
So, man, I think a great place to start is always the beginning. You mentioned kind of when we were on the call earlier that, by the time that you were 35, you had at that point accomplished everything that you had wanted to when you were, back from when you were kind of formulating those thoughts, those ideas as a kid. Let's go back there. Like, where are you from? Where did you grow up? What was life like for Chad Metcalf?
Yeah, so actually, I grew up. Well, we're all in Dripping Springs here, right?
I'm in Iowa. I wish I was in Dripping.
No, I grew up not far from here. I grew up in Wimberley. I mean, we were kind of born in Texas, moved around, but from the time I was about 12 until I joined the Navy, I lived in Wimberley. Typical childhood. Played all the sports, played outside a lot. We lived in Wimberley. The first house we had, it was right by Cypress Creek, so we'd go down there and swim, and I think we were just like trespassed onto somebody's property and used their rope swings and stuff. But you're a kid, you can get away with it. At least back then, there was no cameras and stuff like that. Anyway, fell in love with golf when I was probably about 13. So I was in West Texas. My grandpa, or actually it was my great-grandpa, was a farmer, and I was out there for a few days and digging around in his barns, and he had an old set of golf clubs. It was probably like, I still have them.
So there was golf clubs chilling out in the barn in Wimberley, Texas.
No, this was like in West Texas, like out near like Brownfield, yeah. So they were like just chilling in the barn, and I was like, "Oh, Papa, can I use these?" He's like, "Yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out." He had some, old golf balls, and I just hit balls in the field. And when I got ready to leave, he came and like put them in the car. He's like, "I'll just take them with you." So I would just hit balls in the field by my house. Eventually, I got like a better set of golf clubs, but I realized there was a golf course about a mile from my house. Right, it was like Wood Creek, right, that subdivision over there. And I would take my bike and like ride it through the woods, like up the hill through the woods, carry it across the creek, and like jump over there and root it over there. Now, like the school golf team, they got to play for free, but I was homeschooled. That's another story. But anyway, I was like, hey, if I just like wash the golf carts, can I play for free? I'll work in exchange to be able to play. I don't have any money. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's fine. So I washed the carts, went and played golf. Anyway, did that for a few years, worked at a few golf courses, played junior golf, did all that stuff. And, my plan was to go walk on it. Like, it was Southwest Texas back then, Texas State or UT. And then 9/11 hit. And it seemed like, that golf didn't seem as important then.
Was that the moment that the military became, a high interest for you, or was there a desire there earlier on?
I mean, I think I was kind of like fascinated by, some of the movies, Rambo, and I think like Charlie Sheen had the Navy SEALs movie. So I had like a general awareness of it, of kind of like, oh, that would be kind of cool. But I never really like had a reason to do it. Nor did I think like I could do it at the time. But when 9/11 happened, I remember I was working at Onion Creek Country Club. I was like pulling the golf carts out, and guys came out and they're like, hey, you got to come inside and watch this. And I sat there and like watched it on live TV, the second plane flying to the building. And I went the next day. I think it was the next day. It was, shortly thereafter, to the recruiting office, walked in the Navy recruiting office and said, hey, I think I want to be a SEAL. And the recruiter was this like fat guy. And he's like, oh yeah, I've worked with SEALs. So I was thinking, well, if this guy worked with SEALs, like they can't be that good. So I went next door to the Marine Corps office and was like, do y'all have anything like SEALs? And he goes, yeah, we have Force Recon. It's better. I'm like, okay, sounds legit. And these guys look like they could kill me with one finger. So I signed up. So went to MEPS, did all that stuff, ended up getting disqualified for a titanium plate in my arm when I broke my arm when I was a kid. And they told me I couldn't go. So it disqualified me from like the Marine Corps and all other branches. So I was like, okay, well, what are my options? They're like, well, you can wait like 18 to 24 months and apply for a waiver. So I went to college, had trouble getting up out of bed in the morning and making it to like an 8 a.m. class. So I dropped a bunch of classes, finished some of them, worked a bunch of jobs. It was like a handyman at a ranch, worked at a golf course. I was a waiter, ran a power washing company, and we'd like clean all the commercial kitchens. Like we had all the McDonald's from like San Marcos to San Antonio, and we had a few base jobs. And we were driving to South Texas after working late the night before. We weren't like drinking or anything. We just worked late. I fell asleep at the wheel, hit an 18-wheeler head on, and woke up in a life flight helicopter. And like when I was like fortunate to be alive. I didn't have a seatbelt on. Like I've still got, you can kind of see the scar on my head right here. That's the pavement at 80. Like the truck flipped on my side, and like I walked out of the hospital the next day with just like, some road rash and a splitting headache. And at that point I was like, I need to do something with my life. So a couple weeks later, I went in the Navy recruiting office and I was like, hey, I want to do the SEAL Challenge. I need a waiver for this. Here's the waiver paperwork, and I'll leave tomorrow. And they're like, okay, sounds good. Did it. They're like, okay, well, you can't leave tomorrow. You can leave in July. So that's how I got from, moving to Wimberley to joining the Navy.
Right on. So when you went into the Navy, did you go, I guess, how long from the point of like, enlisting, going into the Navy until, actually going to BUDS and starting to go through the SEAL training?
Yeah, so I did the SEAL Challenge program. So back then, SEALs didn't have their own rate. And so a rate is just like your job in the Navy. Like Army has MOSs. It's just like, what your job is. Now, I think it was around 2005, SEALs got their own rate. So they're now SOs, so Special Operator. But before that, you had to pick what was called a SEAL Source rating. So they had, certain rates or jobs you could choose in the SEAL Challenge program. It was probably like, hey, we need, people with a high ASVAB score to be in these rates. So when they don't make it through BUDS, we can fill these jobs. So for my path was like, I went to boot camp. I went to A school for Operations Specialist at Dam Neck, Virginia, Virginia Beach, and then straight to BUDS. So I went in July to boot camp and checked into BUDS like December of 2003. So it was, pretty much straight, as fast a path as you could get there.
I was just going to ask a quick question. You had said like when you were at college, sorry, my mic jiggled, you weren't even able to make it up for an 8 a.m. class. So I'm guessing like within 2 years, you're sitting there in BUDS and you got to definitely be up before 8 a.m., I'm assuming. So like what was the thing that allowed you to change from being somebody who was struggling to do relatively ordinary things to being able to do something that is arguably one of the hardest military trainings in the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'm actually working on a video kind of on that right now. And I talk about some of that in my book, but it really starts, if we're going to do anything hard, like you have to want it, right? It's like, I don't know, like how many times you're like, oh man, I got to get up and go to work today. Or you're like, oh, I'm getting up to go deer hunting, right? You're like, I'm already up, I'm ready to go, right? It's all like in the motivation of like, okay, I want to do this. Now, are you going to have that motivation like every day? Like, probably not. Definitely not in BUDS. Like you've slept for 2 hours, you're getting back up. but there's definitely like severe consequences if you don't show up. Right. So,
like you get dropped and
yeah. So it's a little more than like your mom. Yeah, you get like kicked out. Yeah. So it's not like your mom like yelling at you because you didn't go to class or.
It's kind of that thing about the motivation where you're talking like, hey, I'm going to get up early and go deer hunting because I want to. Like in my life, I tried to become a pro snowboarder when I lived in Salt Lake City for a number of years. And I remember I'd get up at like 4:30 to go make it to my job at a call center at 5 so I could call for 4 hours and get up on the hill at 9:30, ride for 7 hours, just be totally beat down, finish like another 3-hour, 4-hour shifts, get done at 10 and do it all over again. Just being like, it was not fun, but I could do it because I wanted it that bad. And it's kind of that idea of saying like you really got to want it. And I was just, it's cool that you were able to make that transition. I think a lot of people just kind of get stuck in saying it's easier just to hit the snooze button for the rest of my life.
I think part of it too is, whenever you start doing it, like you build habits around it, right? So it's like the more you do something, the easier it becomes to do it, right? If you train jiu-jitsu and you take 3 weeks off or a month off and you go back, like that day back's going to suck. It doesn't really matter like how good you're, like your cardio is going to suck and you're going to pay for it. But if you stick with it after 2 weeks, like that goes away and you're back used to it again, right? So it's kind of similar in business school. The one I went through was like a super accelerated program. So it was like, I'm not, exaggerating at all. I mean, it was 100 to 120 hour work weeks. So, my work schedule was I got up at 3 a.m. I drove to Austin from New Braunfels, took a 30-minute nap on the couch, had our study group. Then we did all our case discussions till 12. We had a meeting. I drove home at 1, took a hour and a half nap, worked until midnight, and then went to bed for 3 hours. And I did that every day.
Yeah, that's an intense
it's just schedule. like, but you got to want what's on the other side of it, right? So I think that's the big piece of it. Like, don't just suffer for no reason. Like, have a reason to do it.
No, that makes sense, and I definitely don't want to keep making this interview about the Navy SEAL period of your life, but I think a lot of people are always fascinated to hear. And again, I know BUDS is not the hardest part of being a Navy SEAL, but how prepared were you for like going into BUDS and what was that experience like for you?
I was not prepared at all. I'd never been in the ocean. I'd never really ran like farther than 1.5 miles. I don't think, because the screen test was 1.5 miles. So I was like, all right, well, let's just make sure I can do that. And, the screen test, when I went through, it wasn't near as competitive as it is now. Now it's like super competitive. You got to have super fast run times, swim times, do a crazy amount of pull-ups and push-ups and sit-ups. I was a fast runner, but everything else I was like, okay, I passed. Like, that's good enough. So, yeah, I wasn't prepared at all. By the end of it, like, I came around and, could do all the stuff. But I'd say if I was to do it again, I'd probably prepare a little more. But then again, it's so much of it's like mental, and it's like that, how bad do you want it? Because it doesn't really matter how great you are at everything. There's something there that is going to get you, that you're going to fail. And like, that's kind of, what you want to see. Like, how do people react, in spite of failure? Like, can they get back up and keep going, or are they just going to like throw in the towel? I ran a program for guys like coming from the regular Navy that wanted to go to BUDS. And there was this one kid that came through there, and this guy, like, we'd have him, we'd run with him. And this guy did a 4-mile timed run, on the beach, and he's running like sub 5-minute miles. Like, I was fast in BUDS. Like, I could break 25 on a 4-mile timed run, in the sand with boots on. But this kid was way faster than me. Pull up, he did 50 dead hangers. He did 200 push-ups in 2 minutes, like 200 sit-ups. Like, it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. He quit the second day of Hell Week. Right? So it's not like, those are not necessarily the measure of success. Then you look at like a skinny kid from Texas who played golf, and you're like, how the heck did you make it through?
It's that Wimberley, Texas, man. How many team guys have come out of Wimberley?
I don't know of any other ones. There's a bunch from Texas. my second platoon, I think 70% of us were from Texas.
Yeah, I know there was 3 or 4 that came out of my hometown, which was Kingwood, Texas. I think you might know Rick, who lives here in Drip with us.
Yeah, I know Rick.
Yeah, we grew up in the same town, and then I know Scotty came from there, and I think there was at least Brian, and there might have been one other. But yeah, right on, man. So we talked about, all right, so we're talking about like doing, the hard things and wanting it bad enough. And then, we're talking about like, kind of your time with the teams. Like how long were you in the teams?
12 and a half years.
12 and a half years. Okay. So yeah, that's a long time. I mean, and I don't, if there's anything that you really would think would share with everybody from that time period is relevant today. But, one thing I have, I'm sitting here thinking about as we're talking about this is with regards to, that 12 years in the teams and then, having watched, I've gotten to see, a little bit of your journey after meeting you at jiu-jitsu, which by the way, Adam, Chad are you a brown belt or are you a black belt now?
Yeah, I'm still a brown belt. I've been a brown belt for so we started training, under John Danaher, and like, you don't get belts there. It's like you get skills. And I think skills are more important than belts. I mean, you've seen my oldest kid, Maverick, and
oh my gosh, he's an animal on the mat. Yeah.
We get visiting black belts that my kid destroys. I mean, there's kids there that are blue belts, and we've rolled together, but there's kids that are blue belts that destroy me. It's a different it's a different level there.
That's impressive. And that's where is Gordon Ryan rolling there too?
So they all train over at Roca. They may start coming in. I know John was talking about getting his own spot. I don't know if he will. But I mean, just for example, like Big Dan, I don't know if you know who he is. Dan Manisow. Something like that. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Anyway, like Maverick and I have done privates with him for a while, but he's bigger than Gordon Ryan. Like, I mean, he's a giant. They call him the jiu-jitsu giant. But like, he's been to ADCC, and he'll probably be, I mean, he's like 21 right now. He'll be the best in the world one day at jiu-jitsu. Like, I have no doubt. But he's a giant dude, and he can move like a lightweight and like invert and do all these things. But for reference, he's a purple belt.
Okay. Wow. It's amazing how much jiu-jitsu talent there is in Austin, Texas now. Like, I know when I first moved here to go to the University of Texas, I'd been training in Houston. And the only place that I could really find, there was a place called Vandries, which was spoken well of. And then there was TKO Sports, which doesn't exist anymore. And the rest they weren't training fighters. But it's cool to see that transition way that it has and how much talent there is now. But, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, like, just the 12 years being in the teams, and since then you've brown belt in jiu-jitsu, like gone to business school, professional golfer, you've very highly skilled carpenter and woodworker. When we talked previously, you're also now really involved in some of the re-engineering of the academic system. Like, what, like, was it, I guess, how much do you attribute like the way that you work through things now, how you think, how you do, like, how much of that comes from the SEAL teams? How much of that, like is kind of was already there for you? Like, I guess that's kind of the direction I'm going there.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, it's kind of like the question, can mental toughness, are you born with it or can it be trained? And I'd say it's like a little bit of both. That's not a very good, like, take a stand answer. But like, definitely going through something like BUD/S, if you already had a little bit of that in you, which you would definitely have to have some, because I think BUD/S, it finds the right people that have the mindset to go through and then enhances it. Because it's very much like a think outside the box, learn how to problem solve, all that kind of stuff. But, it was really, kind of the program that I'm working on. And again, I didn't like invent any of this stuff. Like, I had the fortune of like meeting some great people, and having them show me it. And I'm like, dude, what, hey, what if we did this with that? And they're like, oh, we could do that. But when I went through it, it was like, I figured out, learned my strengths, and everything kind of made a lot more sense. I was like, oh, that's why I'm good at these things. Like one of my number one strengths is learner, right? So as far as like woodworking, I got into that because I ripped my knee in half doing like combatives. Like I came in on a judo throw, my knee went sideways like 2 days before green team, or 2 weeks before green team. So I didn't end up going, and I'm sitting in a leg brace, and I built this like aquaponic greenhouse. And, back then I had the idea of like, hey, I could take these and, put aquaponics in your house, which you know what aquaponics is. It's basically you're using fish waste to grow plants, and the plants clean the water for the fish. Super sustainable, non-GMO, all that. Anyway, back then nobody cared about GMO or Monsanto or any of those things. They looked at me like I was crazy, but they were like, dang, you can build that? Could you build me this? And I was like, yeah, sure. Let me Google it, or I jump on YouTube. And that's how I figured out how to build stuff. I just picked something that looked really hard to build and go figure it out. And the first time I did it, it'd be terrible, and I'd probably light it on fire and throw it away. And then I'd just build it again. And over time, like, you just build little skills and you get better and better at it. So, kind of, I've attacked that, with several different things in my life.
So there's got to be some innate ability to push through like fear of failure. I think a lot of what stops people today, and not just today, just in general, I think just regardless of the time period we're talking about, I think a lot of some people more than others have a very healthy, fear of failure that gets activated when it comes to learning new things. Like, have you learned, I guess, how, like with your boys or just in general, because it seems like you've been in a lot of situations where you've had the opportunity to coach people where it probably was in the teams, whether it's jiu-jitsu, being a dad, like what kind of like techniques or advice you have for people that struggle with that want to learn new things, want to take on challenges, and they get overwhelmed with that, just fear of failure.
Yeah. That's a great question. Honestly, like, I don't think you ever get over it. Like, we're all afraid of failure, and maybe it's not even the failure that we're afraid of. We're like, okay, what is everybody going to think about me if I try this and fail? And then it's just like, you look at, fear in general. Like for me, I am terrified of heights, right? And a lot of people are like, well, that's weird. Didn't you like jump out of planes and helicopters for a living? I'm like, well, yeah. And well, how'd you do that? Well, I jumped out of the plane and I was like, don't die, don't die. And I'm like, okay, good. The parachute's open. Don't break your legs. Okay, good. We made it. Right. And it was like that basically every time. I didn't hesitate in the door. Like, I just did it. The more I did it, the easier it got to like face it and do it, but it like never went away. Right. And I think like it's a rational fear. But like with fears, and most of our fears are probably rational, but at the end of the day, like, we have two choices. We can either like face them and jump, or we can sit there and like give into them and just wonder like, what could our life have been? So that's kind of that part of it. The other part on, fear of failure, I think that comes down to like a misunderstanding of what failure really is. And failure just means, like, failure, I look at it as feedback. Like, if you're failing, like, that's giving you clues on what you need to do better so that you can not fail in the same way again. So that's like with kids that I coach, I tell them like, hey, look, I don't expect you to be like perfect, like, but try your hardest. And then if you fail, and you will, like, what can you learn from it so you don't fail the same way again? Right. And I think that's, if you can go in with the mindset of that mindset right there, versus like, oh, there's something wrong with me because I failed. I think that changes stuff. So I think if you're not failing, it means one of two things. It means either you're not pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, like you're staying where it's safe and you're not trying anything new. You're not pushing the envelope in your sport, business, like whatever it is, or you're the best in the world. In that case, like, congratulations.
Oh, even then you're going to fail. Like, you look at somebody like Elon, and he's putting these Falcon X's up into the freaking sky or into the space, and then they come down and they just blow up. And he's done that multiple times, and it's not deterring him at all from his mission to have people go to Mars in a couple of years. So yeah, failure is data. And I know we had spoken about this on another podcast, Nate, but we were just talking about how a lot of the time people end up saying that, or they look at their failure and they take that on as an identity. as opposed to something that just occurred during a certain period of their life. And when people begin to imbue a sense of identity as a failure into their lives, then that really can become like a downward spiral, where I think that this is probably leading into some of what you're doing, where you're teaching people mindset and where you're actually talking about education. You know, like you can educate yourself into how would I even say this? Like into an area of prosperity or into an area of success, just by constantly saying, hey, I'm going to take this data, this feedback that is failure, and learn from it and grow. Because like if you do the inverse, and if you just say this failure that I've experienced right now is who I am, then you're learning something, but it's a negative attribute or it's a negative identity. And that's probably, I think that's what's happening a lot with kids right now, is they are being taught so much about identity. Like they're being told you are a cisgender this, or you are a this, that, and the other, and they're not actually learning. Like especially in the public school system. My wife has decided we're not going to take our kids to public school. We're doing unschooling, which is a really cool thing where we just find out my kid's aptitude. I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Yeah, and so it's just like, what are you into? What do you really like to do? And then we just say, okay, cool. We're going to explore that instead. Now you're going to go ahead and get a lot of failure. Like, especially with Legos, man. This kid sucks at building Legos right now. But I know in a few years he's going to be able to do some crazy stuff, just stacking blocks on top of one another. And that's like, again, people aren't being given the opportunity to learn or to be educated anymore. They're just being indoctrinated.
I think that's super huge to not identify with failure. But it's also important to not like over-identify with your successes too, right? Because at the end of the day, like whether you fail or succeed or something, a lot of times it's completely out of your control. Like all you can really control is if you show up and put in the work and work on getting better. Like that can breed the grounds for success, but like it's not guaranteed. And I think, y'all would know this as entrepreneurs, like you can go out there and like do everything right, but maybe the market wasn't ready for it, or the market was shrinking, like whatever those things are out of your control, like doesn't mean it won't. It might work in the future in a different thing, but
yeah, I have this little quote.
I think you just focus on what you
I have this quote on my desk. It says 90% of success is just showing up and doing the obvious things and never convincing yourself that you're smarter than you are. So like you're saying, don't identify with the successes and say, oh, I am this. Like again, success is nothing more than data. It's just showing, like, especially when it comes to companies, like if we talk about what do we do, like, well, we make money, and what is the revenue that the company generates saying? Well, it just says that we provide value. Like we provide more value than the company next to us because people would rather spend their dollar with us than with them. It has nothing to do with like us innately and how special we are. Like, cool, maybe we've got better branding, we have better marketing, we have figured out a way to sell a product that is thriving in the marketplace, but that has nothing to do with us and again, like our innate worth.
Yeah, my kind of every day I try to, I've got a list of stuff I need to do, right? And I like break it down how I'm going to do it, but every day I try to learn at least one thing new or improve like one skill that I have. I try to improve it. So if I'm like video editing, I'm like, okay, what's one thing I can improve on from the last one that I did, right? And I think a lot of people go in with this idea of like, if I'm not good at it right away, like, oh, it's not my thing, right? And that's like a great thing about unschooling is like you throw in some Legos and you're like, figure it out. And like, oh, what do I do? You're like, well, try it. And you're going to suck at it when you start, right? But it's just like, keep putting in the work. Might be good, might be crap, but just keep going. And eventually it will be good.
So it seems like such an obvious thing when we're talking about it, or it could be given into that category of it sounds simple, but it's not necessarily easy. Like, why is that, Chad? Like, just from your experience, like, what do you think's operating there in the background for that?
Yeah, it's definitely simple. Even like the book I wrote on, basically how you accomplish things, like how you build mental toughness. It's super simple, but it's like the day in, that getting up and putting in work when you're not seeing the results, like that's tough. And especially I think with, social media, stuff like that, even just like looking at, it could be a book, it could be social media, it could be whatever it is. But if you're looking at somebody's highlight reel and you're looking at their success, like you're seeing the end result, not like the process it took to go through it. So I'd say like if you can get perspective, like a great book I read, like people look at like, oh, like Michael Jordan and Nike, and they're like, oh, well, that's super successful. Well, if you look at like all the work Michael Jordan did to get there, like there was a lot of struggle. And if you look at like the Nike story of like Phil Knight and how he was like, just, you know, the guy was a track star at Oregon State, was basically like, these shoes aren't any good, I want to make my own. He figured that out, and then he was going to like track meet to track meet, selling shoes out of the back of his car, is how he got started. So I mean, that guy's like overcame so much failure and adversity. So I think that's like part of it is like having unrealistic expectations of what people did to become successful. And I think whenever we actually look a little closer at what they actually did, it can help us kind of manage our own expectations for, you know, the kind of stuff we've got to put in. I think it's like copy the method, not the results, right?
And you mentioned the book that you wrote, and I believe you're speaking of Young Athlete's Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness. Is that the one you're referencing?
Yeah, that's the one.
Why was that the first one you decided to write?
Kind of coaching my kids, coaching their sports teams. I mean, that's, you know, one of the reasons I got out of the Navy was, you know, again, I'd gone, you know, multiple combat deployments. I felt like I'd done the stuff I signed up to do, and my kids were starting to get older, and I wanted to be around as they grew up. So when I got out, like I've, you know, coached their baseball teams and flag football teams and coached them in jiu-jitsu. And, you know, through that, I've coached a lot of other people's kids too. And, you know, you take a kid, he gets up on the mound and he thinks there's something wrong with him because he's nervous or because, oh, I walked 4 people. I'm like, well, yeah, it's literally like the 3rd time you've ever pitched in your life. And pitching is hard. Like, you're going to be nervous. There's people watching you and you don't know what you're doing. Like, why would you not be nervous? So I just, you know, what I figured out, like, grin, I've been blessed to be around like a lot of, you know, great people, like, you know, SEAL instructors, when I played professional golf, like some of the best coaches in the world. And, you know, a lot of their thinking and the way they think and how they accomplish things is rubbed off on me. And what I've noticed is most people, they don't think that way. So that was kind of my attempt is, hey, how can I take the stuff that I learned and put it in a actionable way that you can use? So I rewrote the book 3 or 4 times, and each time I just tried to make it simpler. How can I make it easier to understand and more actionable? Because the last thing we need is like another book on screaming positive affirmations at yourself and freaking breathing and expecting you're going to get better. Like, those things can help if you're already really good. That can make you a little bit better. But for most young athletes, like, you don't get confident by just like screaming positive things at yourself in the mirror. You get confident by like when you have a mountain of work you've put in and evidence that says like that's who you are, right? Like, you've outworked your self-doubt. Right, because you've thrown that many pitches. Like, you know, that's just what you do.
So in the past year, I've committed to shooting at the range like anywhere from 150 to 250 rounds. Just like if I can get in there and just get out for like 20 minutes, I can probably get that many rounds downrange. And, you know, when I started, I guess I would have started in February of last year when I really was serious about that. Like, I sucked. Like, I was terrible at it. And then all I did was get a red dot, and now I'm golden. No, I'm just kidding. But the red dot has helped out a little bit. But, you know, just getting the reps, like, I've realized there's so much there to just having a base to stand upon. Because, like, if you were to ever use your handgun in a defensive situation and you haven't practiced that, like, good freaking luck at actually being able to get your weapon out of the holster, deploy it, point it right at the target, press the trigger, shoot the bad guy, and be done with it. Like, chances are you would freeze. Like, I'm actually reading Mike Glover's book right now, Prepared, and he talks about that specific thing, like, that happens in the mind where most people who haven't trained for not even a specific situation, but who haven't built a base where they're getting reps in of any kind. So like you can make this translation from like, yeah, if you did that with shooting and you're preparing for high stress situations, you could probably apply it for a car wreck or something like that. But the idea here is just having those reps are going to be the most important thing, because then at that time when you actually need to, like, then that's where the breathing, that's where maybe the positive affirmation, if you want to even call it that, like, hey, I can do this. Like, you know, you've trained for this. And again, like that's where a lot of people they're not even doing that. Like, it's just, they're so distracted. They're just like focused on things that ultimately are inane and vacuous and don't matter. And that's like, I can see why a book like that would be so helpful. And it's funny because Nate sent it over to me and I opened it in Amazon, and apparently I bought it too. I didn't even know I did that. It's like, it's in your Kindle cart now. I was like, well, I guess I'm reading that after Culture Code.
It's not just about the reps too, right? It's like, what's the quality of the reps? There's a story they told us, like when we were, I can't remember if we were like in Buds or SQT or if it was when I was in a platoon, but there was a guy who was a like deputy sheriff, right? And every time he shot like a revolver. So every time he'd go shoot, he'd shoot 6 shots. He would, open the revolver, drop the brass out, and then he'd pick up the six shell casings, put them in his pocket, and reload it. So whenever he was under stress and he got in a gunfight, what do you think he did?
Well, he bent down, started picking up the brass and putting it in his pocket before he reloaded.
Yeah, he died as a result of that. So that's why they taught us, like, even in training, it was like when you drop your magazine, you don't pick it up. When the range is over and you're done and you're cleaning up, you can go clean all that up. But in training, like, you don't pick up your mags. It's very, like, specific. And then how you introduce, like, pressure, like failure training. So a good example, and you'll read about it in the book, but I did this with a group of 9-year-olds in flag football. And, like, the first day of practice, I went in and 80% of the kids on the team couldn't catch the ball, right? And I'd gone in, like, I never played football, did anything like that, but, like, I know a little bit about strategy. So, like, I read the rules. Okay, flag football, like, what do we have to do? So you have 4 downs to make it to midfield, and then you have 4 downs if you cross midfield to get to the end zone. But if you're within 5 yards of midfield or the end zone, it's pass only. So I'm like, okay, we need a couple running plays, and we need to be able to catch short passes. So the first day I said, hey kids, do y'all just want to have fun or do y'all want to win? Like, what's y'all's goal? They're like, well, we want to win. I'm like, okay, well, let's get after it. So I set up a cone about 3 yards away, and then I'd put another one every 3 yards. And if they caught it, they moved to the next one. And if they caught it, they moved to the next one. If they missed any, they went back and started over, right? So they'd like succeed, fail. And by the end of the first practice, like, everybody could catch from 3 yards. I mean, it's basically like a handoff, right? So, but they're like building their confidence up. The next practice, I was like, okay, if you drop the ball, you run a lap and then come back. So everybody's dropping the ball because they're nervous. Like, oh, I'm going to have to run. But after a practice, they were all good. So I upped it again. I was like, if you drop the ball, the entire team runs, right? So everybody drops it, and then they get used to it. When we got to, like, the season, these kids were just crushing people. Like, we were run ruling people, like, every game. Like, we're talking like 100-6. And we had 4 plays. We had them all memorized. Hurry up offense. Like, if you don't get ready, like, too bad. We're going. But that's essentially it. It's like train for, like, what you're trying to achieve.
And I've got the Cliff Notes over here, so I feel like I'm cheating a little bit. But, like, when we were talking earlier, we were talking about there's a thinking problem that a lot of people have. So, like, a lot of what you're teaching in that book is how to think and how to, like, assess situations and how to go about the process. And that's a massive need right now. And I think it'd be worth a few minutes talking about kind of like why that is. And I think this is something I'd love to hear both Chad, you and Adam talk about, is like, why is that such a need right now? Why is there such a problem with, just people in general? I think a lot of people like to talk about the younger generations and how different they are. It's worth saying that there's both positives and negatives that are happening right now as it relates to the way technology is affecting things. But kind of going back to the question is like, what's going on? Why are people having such a hard time with thinking and being able to, like, think for themselves, make decisions, and achieve the things that they want to achieve.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like limited to this generation, right? I'd say it's a humanity, like all of our existence problem, most likely. You could look all the way back to, like the Romans, right? And when the Caesars wanted to, pass a law and rob the people blind, what did they do? They threw games at the Colosseum and gave them free bread, right? So they'd be distracted by the spectacle going on. Meanwhile, they're like robbing them blind in the background. So I think like none of the stuff we're seeing is anything new. We just probably have more distractions now, right? We've got, our devices in our hand. Like there's no shortage of distractions. And there's, so many different, messages put out there that I think for kids, I mean, really anybody, it could be easy to get like confused if you weren't grounded on, some kind of, actual fact, right? Like this idea that, truth is relative. Like, I think that's like, is where a lot of our problems kind of stem from.
Yeah, you don't have to hold back here too. If you're feeling like there's something you might want to sugarcoat for the audience, rip that Band-Aid off. We're not afraid to say it.
There's a good book. You've probably read it if you're like doing the unschooling stuff. I think it's called like Dumbing Us Down. Have you seen that one? So it's essentially, public school, like modern education was invented, I think, by the Prussians, way back when, to create infantry soldiers. And then the system was adopted by the elites to create factory workers, right? So this idea that you're going to learn something in these short little chunks of like, okay, I'm going to spend an hour in math class and an hour in English class, an hour in geography to memorize some facts that I'm never going to need to know, right? Like, but you're not actually getting mastery on any of the skills because you're like, okay, well, you got 70%, and you probably didn't actually get 70%. You got a 50% and you retook it 14 times and the teacher finally like gave you a passing grade because you tried hard, right? So it's like our kids, and it's not their fault, but they get put in this and then they get out of there and you're like, okay, well, I did the thing. Even the kids who apply themselves and they do well, it's like, okay, I got good grades. I went to college and there's not even a job for this thing I studied for, or I got a job for the thing I studied for and I hate it and I'm miserable with my life and I want to go on like vacations to escape a life I hate, but I can't even enjoy it because I dread going back to my life, right? So I think like we've got to flip it, and it starts with like figuring out what your gifts are, what your strengths are, and that points like to, hey, this is what you're going to be passionate about. And whenever you're going to work on something you're passionate about, it's actually not like work because you actually enjoy it and you're good at it. And we tend to enjoy the things we're good at. So that's kind of the next thing I'm working on is, and again, I didn't invent this. Guys at Jeff Sandifer, the guys at Acton School of Business, Acton Academy, kind of, spent the last 20 plus years kind of coming up with this system. And I was fortunate enough to go through it and learn this stuff at like 35. And it totally changed my life. Like for me, I got out of the Navy and had this crazy idea. I was going to play college golf, went in the Navy, had this idea that if I had enough time and money, I could make it on the PGA Tour. I still think like if I had enough money, I could do it. Maybe. We'll see if my back holds up. But anyway, so I went for it. I tried for 3 years. The third time I ran out of money, like I decided like, okay, we have to do something else. Like we were so poor, we were going to the food bank for food. That's when I was like, okay, I can't like put my family through this anymore. So I went and I applied for like 100 jobs, went on a bunch of interviews, and I couldn't get a job. Like it was like, part of it was I didn't speak the business language. So I didn't know how to articulate like the things I was good at and how they applied to what that company was trying to do. That was part of it. The other part of it is if you're going to ask people for help, like you need to be specific, right? So when I tell buddies, hey, I need to get a job. They're like, oh, what do you want to do? I'm like, I don't know anything. Like no one can help you if you say, oh, I don't know anything. You're like, well, I don't know what to. But if you're like, hey, I want to do something in software, I want to do something in this, at least pick an industry. Like somebody can help you then. So that's part of it. Then I went to business school, learned the language, and more importantly, learned like my strengths and how those would apply. And then after there, I had 14 job offers, ended up turning them all down and doing a startup with another guy. But it's so powerful, if you can start with that, find your strengths, find your gifts, and what's that spark? Like, what is it you want to work on, right? And that doesn't mean like you honestly will probably make more money. I know it was true for me.
No, I was just going to ask, I could pontificate about like what's happening with the dumbing down of children, and that happened as far back as 130, 140 years ago. But the question that I had was around your service to this country, your military service, and then coming out of the service, and then waking up to the fact that, wow, like the entire generations have been hoodwinked by the government that I served, by by this group of elite people who have manipulated for the better half of 50 years all the military, well, I guess it's even like going on 70 or 80 years, like the military industrial complex. Like essentially, like how do you feel about it now that you're on the other side, now that you're out and watching what they're doing, how they're basically creating cannon fodder for the enrichment of a small group of people? And then like, I can tell that you care enough because you're not putting your kids in public school. So you're like, hey, I'm aware of this, but like, dude, I don't know. Like my dad was in the military. He was in the Navy, as a matter of fact. And so I've always had a pretty substantial appreciation for people who have served. And now that we're involved serving serving veterans with our companies, and even people who are in active duty military, I'm just like, God, like they've got to be so pissed. They've got to be so pissed, especially like when you watch what happened in Afghanistan. And I know that's just kind of like a microcosm of what's happening in totality, but like, it enrages me. And so I would imagine that, and it's not like you're a victim, but it's just like thinking about it, like how did we get here? And, like what was that all for? I don't know. Like that's a kind of a loaded question, but I would just like at the raw level, like how do you feel about what they've been doing to us?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely infuriating. But at the end of the day, like we can sit around and be pissed, or we can try to do something to make an impact. I mean, for me, I turned off the news like 4 years ago, right? Because I mean, most of it's probably BS, and the rest of it isn't helping me move the needle to where I want to go. So honestly, I think if we all just turned off the news, we'd probably get along better, right? So it's like, how do you, it's much easier to rule a people that are divided than people that are united. So, but yeah, as far as, industrial military complex, like we could go deep down that rabbit hole. Have you read The Creature from Jekyll Island?
No, that's about the formation of the Fed though, right?
There's a book that's out, and then there's also a really long YouTube kind of documentary video that's out there on it. I wish I could remember the guy's
Edward Griffin
name.
Yeah.
But like,
here we go.
I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but there's a cartoon version, which is kind of like, if you watch the cartoon version, you'll essentially get The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's the American dream film, right? It's like a cartoon about how our monetary system works. I'd say once you understand that, everything else kind of falls into place.
Yeah, that's kind of where I could pontificate on it as well, because it's like, I mean, if you want to get down to brass tacks, why is it this way? Why have kids been taught to not think? It's because if they don't think, then you can do whatever you want to them, and then you can manipulate them into doing whatever it is that you need. And this is, again, why the centralization of, or not even the centralization, but like this movement of, that is it, consolidation of wealth to just like a couple hundred families across the globe is like well, that's how it happened. They were able to achieve something by brainwashing, for the lack of a better word, billions of people. Like, and you saw it with the whole pandemic. Like everybody just kind of jumped on board with this groupthink of like, this is the right thing to do. Like they're not actually having or utilizing critical thinking skills to come to a place where they have concluded on their own that maybe I would do this because I think that this is in the best interest of my neighbor or myself or my family. It was just like everybody just jumped on a bandwagon because that's what they've been doing their entire lives. Like everything is a bandwagon that they've been on. Like you don't argue against the teacher. 8 periods or whatever you have in your school is the way that we should be educated. 7:30 to 2:30. Da 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 da. Your GPA. All these things that are unequivocally unchallenged because like this is what the system has propagated and it's what has been allowed to continue on for the better half of this century. And, again, it's all about money and power, and we could go down the conspiracy rabbit hole, and thank God that Alex Jones is now back on X so that we can get a constant feed of all of the truth that he's known forever.
What is interesting is, well, all my crazy conspiracy theories have all come true already, and then all the people who thought that I was crazy when I would tell them these things, 10, 15 years ago, they're all like, I see them posting about it. I'm like, oh, you're on board. Okay. Well, you caught up finally.
No, so what are some of the crazy ones, Chad, that you had before that have come true? And we don't have to go into big detail. I'm just curious which ones.
I don't know. That might be a topic for another show.
Let's do it. Let's have the conspiracy show. I'm down for it. We can just do Tuesday conspiracies.
I'll have to catch up on them.
You were talking about the creature from Jekyll Island. I think it was only a year. It might have been a year and a half ago where I learned that we haven't always paid taxes to the U.S. government. That actually didn't happen until like World War II or something like that. And it was just a suggestion. It was like, hey, like this is what you should be doing. And I saw some of the propaganda films.
Yeah, 1916.
Yeah,
specifically. Yeah. Yeah, I think it came in with the Fed.
Yeah, and then once people just started doing it, then it became an actual thing, which is just crazy. Kind of going back to the bandwagon thing.
Yeah, and if you look at it, what's really interesting, like you could be like, oh, there's just so many like coincidences on thing of like all the people who like oppose the Federal Reserve, which the Federal Reserve is our, like I believe it's like our sixth central bank in the U.S. But it's like the people, like the billionaires who oppose the Federal Reserve, like they were on the Titanic, right? And it's like one of the guys who was like, I don't know if he like owned the thing or whatever. I'm not an expert on this, but I watched the documentary and like the guy had like invited them on it. And then last minute he was like, oh yeah, I'm not going. Right. So it's like, that's suspicious.
That I did not know. That I'm not at all surprised. Like, it's just like, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself.
I mean, I saw it on the internet, so it has to be true.
I saw Flat Earth on the internet, so it's totally true. It's very flat.
So kind of going back to, all right, so we've talked about thinking and fear of failure and, kind of like the process for working through fear of failure. We've talked about unschooling. Tell us more about, so obviously there's author Chad and you've got the books that you're writing. And I do want to talk a little bit more about that, but this unschooling thing though is very fascinating to me. Like I didn't homeschool my kids. We attempted at one point and we have a unique family situation where that ended up not being the choice that we made long term, but there seems to be a bigger movement happening as it relates to this. So what is it about? Like, so that, and there's a particular one that you mentioned, Chad, that you've gotten focused on, which is Acton. Why is that the one that you've kind of gravitated towards and are excited about? And that's, you've got, I think one of your kids is actively in it right now. They all were in it at one point, and there's one that's staying in it. Like, what is it about that program? Yeah.
So my older two, so for me, like I went to Acton School of Business, and anyway, the guy that started it, he was, super successful entrepreneur, and he was teaching at Macomb's Business School, which is the UT MBA program. And I think this is probably 25, 30 years ago. But he was teaching an entrepreneurship program, and I think he went to the dean, and he was like, hey, I think what we ought to do is we should have successful entrepreneurs come teach these entrepreneurship courses and not have tenured professors teaching from theory, right? Should we teach from experience or theory? Like, okay, well, I would say experience would make more sense. Anyway, the dean's like, nah, we're not going to do that. So he just started his own, right? And it's, you do all the like Harvard business school cases, but it's all Socratic method, meaning the teachers will not answer any of your questions except with another question. So you have to learn how to learn. So at that school, they make 3 promises to you: that you'll learn how to learn, that you'll learn how to make money, and that you'll learn to live a life of meaning, which the third is arguably the most important, right? Because it's, and the way they like judge, like, how do you know if you lived a life of meaning? I think there's 3 questions. It was, at the end of your life, who did you love? Who loved me, and did I live a life of meaning? So like we have to come up with like, what does that mean for us? Because if nobody's on their deathbed and goes, I wish I made another $100,000, or I wish I spent 80 more hours in the office. So that's kind of that school. And I was talking with the owner. I said, wait, you have this for kids? He's like, oh yeah, we've got it. So his problem was like, I don't want my kids to go in the classroom. Like, kids weren't made to sit still for 8 hours a day. And that's not even the best way to, like, you don't actually learn that way. So they started a K through 12 program. It's called Acton Academy, like Acton. Like Lord, I think it came from Lord Acton, who said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So anyway, the premise of that school is, if you look at traditional education, the primary means of education is learning to know, right? So it's memorizing facts, and that's about it. Like you're studying, you're cramming for this test so that you can pass it, so that somebody could tell you did a good job, right? So it's learning to know, tests, and standardized tests, right? And the teacher's pay is based off of like, how attendance and how were the test scores. At Acton, it's different. There's no grades, and there's different types of learning. There's learning to learn. So the kids actually get in there and they have to learn how to teach themselves and learn, right? Because the guides that are there, they're called guides, not teachers. They're forbidden from making any declarative statements. So they can only answer their questions with another question. They could guide them towards the answer, but they can use your resources, use your fellow students. So that's their first one, learning to learn. Then you have learning to do, right? So they'll do quests where you need to learn this skill to be able to do this quest. Like, for example, if you're going to build a bridge, math becomes pretty important if you don't want the bridge to collapse and your car to go in the river, right? So now they have a reason to learn the thing they're learning. Like for my youngest, he won the children's business fair, and the kid's like, I don't know, a year behind in math because he's just not interested. But he's good at math. I'm like, okay, hey, go make your thing. He's selling these birdhouses. And I'm like, hey, what's your unit economics? He's like, well, it cost me $3 in materials. I sell it for $20. I have a contribution of $17, and it takes me 3 minutes to make it. So I think I can make this much money. I'm like, little dude knows math, right? He's just not motivated, right? So I told him, I said, hey, now that I see you're good at math, if you finish all of 3rd grade, in the next 2 weeks, you can get a Slurpee every day after school. Little dude knocked out math in a week. We can stop and getting Slurpees every day. So that's your first 2. You're learning to learn, learning to do, and the last one is like learning to be, right? And that's like, how can you be a good member of society, right? And that's part of it. So the kids, like, they have guardrails, but the kids make the rules in there. So it's like, hey, here's what we're voting on. They have like council where they vote on stuff and do all those things, and then they hold themselves accountable to it. Like the kids, they have the culture is like, we want other kids here. We want you to participate. But if you're going to be like disruptive, then like you can't be here. So it's like, do you want to follow the thing you said you were going to do, or do you want to go somewhere else? So that's a big part of it. And I think this session, they were learning about tyranny.
Oh boy! Right,
and so they had the Patriots and the Loyalists, right? And King George came in and started imposing taxes. If you want to sharpen your pencil, That's like 10 hero bucks. You want to eat lunch? Oh, that's 10 hero bucks, whether you eat or not. Right? So, and it's then they could go and, okay, do y'all want to revolt or not revolt? So they're like, revolt. And if they rolled like, I don't know, whatever number higher, they won the revolt. If they lost, then there was like more taxes imposed. So it's like they're actually learning like life stuff. But it's like super powerful to see these kids like go in there and, you know, take charge of their own learning. And what's incredible is whenever you get a kid motivated and it's their idea to do it, like, I mean, most of these kids are doing like 2 or 3 grade levels. Like there's no like, oh, stop, sorry, wait, the other kids haven't caught up. It's no, you go as fast as you want. Just go to it. And the kids that come out of Acton Academy and finish the Launchpad, it's not like they're 1 or 2 times more like productive than a kid coming out of public school. They're like 100 to 200 times more effective, right? So, and part of it is, you know, they've just been taught to think this way. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do with Jeff, is roll out the end of this program to like people who didn't, you know, have the fortune of like going to Acton Academy to grow up with this. Like, how can we give them the tail end of it so they can like basically like catch up and go, oh my, like take what I got at like 35 and get it at 17 and you'll be light years ahead of.
So this would be something available. They would be available to people who are teaching their kids at home or something like that. Yeah. So the next grade adventure one, I'm working on rolling that out right now. So it'll be, I've got some like, so there's 3 quests. I mean, there's also like a 4th one if you're interested in entrepreneurship. But essentially there's quests that are about 6 weeks long. The first one is like, who am I? So you'd go in there and figure out your strengths, your purpose, what you're passionate about. And then you jump on the next one where you start pairing that with an industry, a job, or whatever. But those will be available like online shortly. I have like free challenge quests people can grab to start kind of sampling the program. And then I'll have signups available shortly. But essentially you'd run through that and then we kind of do like a weekly Zoom meeting with like a Socratic discussion. So I've got a pilot group running through now. Again, they've been running these for years, but it's only been available for like people who went through the MBA program I went through, or the kids like finishing the high school portion of Acton Academy. And so is Acton Academy, do they have like a curriculum that somebody living in a state like mine, Iowa, so very far away from Texas, that they would be able to plug into and follow, or is it entirely in-person learning?
So yes, right now it is in person. There's over 300 of them worldwide right now. And I've been after that. So that's kind of one thing I want to try to figure out is like, you know, because I did homeschool, right? So I'm like, okay, if we could roll this thing out, could we roll out Acton Academy virtually, right? Like that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it yet, but right now it is all in person. I think there might be a way to do it. It's just like, okay, do you get, you know, can you get 80% of the value at least doing it virtually? I think there's some testing that needs to be done there. But there's definitely probably Acton Academies in your area.
So what I was thinking about is like, if you could teach somebody how to be a guide. So, you know, Acton Academy would like, and this is a question, less so like a prescription, but like if they could teach somebody how to be a guide in their own home. So like, hey, I want to take homeschooling with my kids to the next level, and I don't want to go buy just some generic homeschooling curriculum. What I'd really like to do is practice the Acton philosophy. So how do I become a guide if I'm a mom or a dad who does homeschooling in my own home? That would be super helpful, because like, you know, my wife she was a teacher for a long time and she did Montessori, so she knows how to do self-led curriculum or self-led learning. But I really like the idea of the Socratic method, and then just having like this kind of directorship from the guide as opposed to the teacher. Because really that's what a parent is, right? A parent is supposed to be a guide as well as an educator. So it'd be super cool if they had something like that. And even if they didn't have it now, like, hey, you grew up in homeschool, you probably didn't, maybe you go to college, maybe you don't. Well, here's the Acton Academy for you after you're in your early 20s or late teens, and now you can go and do it on your own. You can be your own guide, just not with your own truth.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they definitely have guide training. As far as like rolling it out, I mean, I think that could definitely be done. But essentially, even as like parents, I remember like when we first like went to Acton Academy, like you sign a parent contract that is essentially like the Cliff Notes version of it is like, I promise to not help my kid. I will let them fail. Right? And it's like, that sounds it sounds cruel, but if you think about it, failure is inevitable, right? And it's like, do you want your child to learn how to fail under the safety of your roof with the safety net? Or do you want them to learn how to fail when they have no safety net? Right? So just like an example of it is, like one of my kids would go, Dad, I need help on this math problem. Now, what they're really saying is, Dad, I want to go play video games. Can you help me finish my math real quick so I can go do it fast, to go play my game faster? So that what you would say, your response is, for math, if you're unschooling, like check out Khan Academy. You could learn everything about math for free with their videos, right? And you do their interactive things, and it's mastery based. Like you don't move on till you do the next one. And they've got a bunch of learning stuff. Like Khan Academy's like super legit. But essentially, it's like he'd come to me and go, Dad, I can't do this math thing. I'm go, oh, did you watch the video? Yeah, Dad, I watched the video. Did you watch it 10 times? No. I'm like, okay, well, let me know when you've watched it 10 times and tried your hardest 10 times. And if you still can't figure it out, I will help you. Never once has my child needed my help to solve a math problem. Right? Because they go back through there and they do it and they're like, well, it's freaking, all right, I got it. I got it figured out. So that's part of it. It's like asking good questions like, well, what do you think? What do you think the answer? Well, why would you think that? And even when he has the answer, he's like, oh, Dad, is this the right answer? I'm looking at it. I'm like, yeah, it's the right answer. But I don't say that. I go, I don't know. Well, why would you think it was the right answer? Well, I did this and this. I'm like, well, it sounds like you know what you're talking about. Do you think you're right? He's like, are you messing with me? I'm like, no. I'm like, oh, he clicks it. I'm like, oh, what'd you need my help for? Seems like you had it.
Yeah, whereas back in high school, we could go to the back of the math book and the odd ones always had the answers in there.
What did you say that was? You said it was the Khan Academy?
Khan Academy. I think it's Kahn Academy.
Okay. I was actually going to ask.
But yeah, that's
cool.
Yeah, it's good. Like just because I jumped on there and he's like, Dad, this is hard. I was like, I'll tell you what. I'm going to start at kindergarten math. And I said, I bet in the next hour I can be past you. And I did like the first 6 grades of math in 3 hours or something. It was like, okay, awesome. Here we go. Now it starts getting up there and you're like, algebra. I don't really remember. That's going to take some work.
Was that up on YouTube or where is that?
No, Khan Academy. You go through the modules. Like you can just create a free account and go through there. It'll start it literally shows you step by step how to do everything, and then you would take the unit level test, and depending on how many you get right or not, you'd get a percentage. But you could go just straight to the test, and if you pass the test, you could be like, all right, you're done with first grade. Go on. The idea of doing worksheets and repetition and all that, that's boring. Nobody wants to do that, especially if you already know how to do it. Move on, give them a challenge. If they fail on this challenge, then they probably need this prerequisite step down here. And then they'd realize oh, well, now I'm back to this learning to do. I need to solve this other thing. So, I need this prerequisite skill.
That's a great resource. What else? So what else are you doing to help your kids think?
Like jiu-jitsu. I think that's one that is a good problem solving under pressure. Right. And my oldest, Maverick, when he was 13, I moved him from the kids class to the adults class. And he went from being the top dog, never got beat, to just being dominated by everyone, right? Because he didn't have his man strength yet. And the skills he had, he just didn't, he was at that point where the skills he had weren't enough to overcompensate for the strength differential. So, it was, several months of crying, Dad, I want to quit. I hate it. And I was like, okay, well, what's the problem? He's like, well, everyone's bigger than me and stronger than me. I'm like, okay, well, we could start lifting. And, what about your skill? He's like, I could probably get those better too. I'm like, well, seems like you could work on your defense. So, just put together a little program, started working on it. And it'd still be like, oh, he's just getting punished, but he'd start getting better at escaping, better at defending. And then, it's probably almost a year later. It was like this, I don't know if the kid was like, I don't know, somewhere between 19 and 25 came in there, and Maverick made him cry. Just strangled him. And he looked over and he was like, yeah. And he got in the truck and he just like sat a little taller, right? And like that's the day he started like believing in himself, right? I mean, he still got beat after that. And you go to a place where the competition and stuff, you still get beat, but it's just like.
But something clicked in that moment where he was like,
I can do this.
I got it. Being
a parent is hard. Like you don't get a manual, right? And it's like, okay, how can I help my kid? And half the time, like you see your kids doing something, you're like, dude, that's not going to work out for you. And they're like, well, how would you know? Well, because I already did that and it didn't work for me, right? So it's not going to work for you either. In certain things, maybe not in all cases. But I mean, yeah, we're still figuring it out. A lot of times we've got our oldest, he's about to graduate, and we've got a freshman and a 10-year-old. But I mean, that's kind of how I got kind of on this path with the next great adventure. Is I was reaching out to just try to get the like curriculum and programming so I could kind of run him through that same course, and then just kind of bumped in, hey, let's try to like put this together to reach a bunch of kids. Because I know if like, I've got this thing, my kid's about to graduate high school and he's like, okay, what's next? What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to pay my bills? How to know if I'm going to like it or not. So it's like, hey, I think the thing I did would really be helpful for you. And my thought is like, if I have this problem, not necessarily a problem, but just I'm in this situation with my kid. I know there's a bunch of other people out there that probably have the same thing. So it's really like, how can I build awareness out there that there is kind of an alternative path that you could go down? Like and the path could say like, hey, the thing I want to do does require me to go to college. Or it could say you don't need to go to college. But this idea of like the path is good grades, go to college, get a career, like maybe, but maybe there's something else.
Well, it's just not an automatic anymore, and nor should it really probably have ever been. You list out a couple things that kind of operate at Acton Academy. One of them was learn to learn to be. Then there was a third one.
Learning to do. And then you have found unique ways to create pressure and doing hard things. So that way, not only are they learning to think, but they're also learning to think in difficult situations. So if someone's out there trying to think like, all right, if I'm breaking this down, like, and these tools sound great, but I've got some other ideas, like those are some solid things. So learning to learn, learning to do, learning to be, and then applying pressure. Yeah. And there's a really good book on it. But it talks about all the like learning to learn, and actually Jeff like wrote the foreword in it, so I'm guessing that's where he got like a lot of kind of the concepts for. But yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, and when you think about it, you're like, oh, well, that makes total sense, right? It's like the learning to know, that used to be important. Like before we had the written word, whenever you could write down things and catalog them, it was probably important to be able to remember things. Not that it's not important, but it's like with business, like I need to know the thing that applies to the thing I'm doing right now. And if I can reference and look that up, I don't have to like remember it all. Like you're not going to remember everything, but it's like, how can I learn? How can I get the information I need to use when I need it? Right. I think that's a more valuable skill than memorizing that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Right. Like, that has done nothing for me.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we have Google at the tip of our fingertips, so why would you need to memorize anything at this point? And maybe people would say, well, that promotes an over-reliance on the internet, but it's like, do you really need to just fill up your head with useless facts like Columbus sailing in 1492, or should you be able to learn or think critically so that as information is coming at you, you can make informed decisions that are going to impact your life positively as opposed to negatively? And yeah, it's a good thing to be teaching people. Like
if you were going to learn to know, like maybe like learning how to grow food, like that might be valuable. There's certain things that are probably worth knowing if you didn't have internet.
Speaking of food, what's your favorite barbecue down in Dripping? or just in the area?
Well, so being a Wimberley guy, and you've mentioned some other places, New Bronzeville, like, so you've probably done some of the barbecue tour around here.
I mean, Franklin's is good. I don't know, Salt Lick. Like, you can't beat the like all you can eat.
When do they have that?
Oh, it's you get the family style. It's like $30 all you can eat.
We are going there the next time I'm in town because, yeah. I didn't let you answer, but Salt Lick's my favorite right now.
The last time Adam was here, we took him to Salt Lick, we went to Pigpen, and then we drove. And then I wanted to take him a little bit outside of the dripping area, and I took him down to Lockhart, and we did Croyd's Market.
Oh, that's good too. Lockhart barbecue's pretty good too.
It is. The game's high down there.
Yeah, Terry Black's is pretty good.
What do you think about? Have you had Cooper's out in Llano?
Yeah, I've had that one a couple times. Yeah, my buddy has a little ranch out in Llano. Every time we go out there, he goes by Cooper's and grabs barbecue. So it's pretty good. I don't know. I think Salt Lick, maybe it's like the all you can eat.
But Franklin's,
it's hard to beat that Salt Lick. That Salt Lick barbecue sauce is pretty.
But you're saying Franklin's is worth the hype?
The best fast food barbecue. Yeah, it's pretty. I think I've had it like once. I'm not a big fan of like lines. So I think the only time I've had it is like somebody brought it somewhere. I'm like,
yeah, I thought you had said that was the first one. I was like, oh, okay, so it is worth the hype. But yeah, Lions, jeez.
First time that I had Franklin's was in 2008, I think, when it was just a little bitty trailer, totally different location. And the boxing, I was training at Lord's Gym down in downtown Austin when I started boxing again. And he would bring it in from time to time. And I remember him telling everybody, like, oh yeah, it's this place. They sell out. You got to show up with like your ice chest, or you got to get there early. And he had brought some in, and I tried it there, like there in the boxing gym. And it was fantastic, but I don't know. I have an aversion to lines as well. So it's never been something I've gone done, but people swear by it.
Yeah, people, I don't understand the fascination with like going to Disney. It's like lines, tons of people, and overpriced food. It's like my least favorite three things, all in one.
Yeah, and
place.
you're spending $1,000 to get there. You're spending $1,000 a night to stay there. You're getting ripped off left and right. The whole like adult Disney crowd is just the weirdest thing in the world. Like, you're 40 and you're wearing a Mickey Mouse t-shirt. What is wrong with you?
Honestly, man, I think it's because I it is, but when you see the way people end up living, there's these lives of quiet, I don't want to say it's like not everyone's out there living in quiet desperation, but I think so many people end up not going through this upbringing like Chad's been talking to us about, where people actually really learn how to learn. They learn how to think. They learn how to do and be and find a purpose and a mission. And I think people end up like in their 40s and like, dude, they just want to touch some happiness. And I mean, I've been there a couple of times, and I side where you guys do as well. As I'm like, oh my gosh, I could think of a bunch of ways to spend our money and enjoy it more. But I've watched, even as an adult, I was like, man, they're pumping like, very specific smells like out actually into the open area where you are that like create like this, these five senses experiences, and you're there with your kids. Like I have all girls. So when we went, they were all little and just absolutely fascinated with princesses and like, seeing the looks on their faces. I mean, it really was amazing. But like, as far as the adults go, man, I just think that's where we're at as a society. Like they, here, I'll tell you another example. And this may take us down a totally different path, or it may fall flat. But I went out to California years ago at the request of my buddy's wife, who was a total psychopath, which is a totally different story. But like, I didn't go out there because she asked me. I did it because this was my guy. Like, this is my boy going back from like high school, and she was worried about some of the stuff that he was participating at that time. And he's like, he's going to this rave, and like he goes all the time, and I think this and I think that, and I'm like, okay, like wall, whatever, but like something may be going on with my buddy, so I'm gonna go. And we go there, and the whole time, like, there's this big lead up. We go hang out this hotel room, and like, I'm not partaking in anything. Like, I'm not drinking. I'm not. I'm there just to truly be there and just kind of check out what's going on and hang out. And I'm hanging out with kids that are. And I say kids, they were like in their mid 20s, and I was probably like in my mid 30s at this point. but like these are like the best and the brightest. I mean, we're talking like, Ivy League B schoolers, like they're bankers now. They've, come out of like really high level consulting firms. I mean, these are the people that the torch should be getting passed to. And I listened to one of them tell me for like, I mean, literally 40 minutes. All he did was he told me this whole story about all the things that he had to do to find these very specific light pulsating glasses that have no lenses. It's just this wireframe thing that's got these really cool pulsing lights that, like, when you're at a rave doing rave things, it creates this awesome experience. It's 40 minutes just telling me this whole story. And there's this more and more examples of that. We get to this place and same thing. We're linking up with a bigger group. But I mean, these are very, very, very sharp people. And as I'm hanging out with them more and I'm seeing, what's going on, and it's like Monday through Friday, they're either all on Adderall or they're doing Coke. Like they are doing what they have to do to power through the insanity that is their Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, this is what they do. And I'm sitting there watching it and I'm kind of standing back and like, there's just this, I don't know if either one of you have ever been to like any experience like that, but it's like there's this pulse and this kind of hive tribal kind of mind existence that it's this a single entity that almost gets created. And I got it. Like they're in so much pain and they're like, they're living out this existence that they probably did not plan to. They don't realize that they're not, but they're searching for something that they want to be able to touch, to have a little bit of happiness, have a little bit of relief, like something that feels good. I walked away going like, wow, like there's a lot of pain, like in this younger generation right now. Like they're living these lives that they don't know. And this can't be the case for all of them, but some of them like may not know exactly how they ended up exactly in this spot, but they just were doing the things that they were being told to do and where to go and how to be. And that's where they ended up. And I mean, I walked away like with, very like eyes open in a very different way, going like, man, we're barreling down the tracks in a way that is very scary.
That goes to exactly what you were talking about, Chad, about the 3 things that you're learning, like how to learn a life of purpose, because that's just escapism. Like, I'm sure you had even mentioned this about Disney. It's like people are going there to like get in touch with something that they experienced when they were young. They're like reverting to an almost infantile state because they're like, oh man, when I was young, like I felt all safe and cuddly. So I'm just going to extend that into my adult life, and I'm going to pay thousands of dollars to try and reach back to a time when I felt that, like, and now it's just, total escapism. And if you don't have purpose, then you're just always going to pursue that, I would guess.
Yeah. And when you find the thing that gives you that feeling, like you'll keep going back if you don't have anything else.
I think even with, I was, definitely kind of been in that place of like, okay, what do I do now? Right. And I think this like next great adventure thing, like the pilot course I'm running, I have people in there from, I think the oldest in there is like 55 probably right now going through it. So it's not just for, I'm primarily targeting like, 17 to 24-year-olds to go through. But, if somebody listening to that is like, oh, I'm 40 and I'd love to do that. Like, dude, like there's no reason why you couldn't, I figured that stuff out at, 35 after, doing what I did and was kind of like, okay, what the heck do I do now? Is like, have I done everything I'm going to do? And I think when you get to that point, like it can be like a very like depressing place of like, okay, I've done everything I'm going to do. What the heck am I, I guess I'll just like, just wait to die. Right. And try to find some joy somewhere. Right. But it's like, I think especially like as men, like we need purpose in our lives. Like we need something bigger than ourselves that's like going to help other people, right? I think that's really it.
Yeah, that mission thing's big.
Yeah. Have you seen the craze with all this like VR stuff?
Like the meta?
Like all the virtual reality stuff?
Yeah, I took my kids on a AR trip. Whitewater rafting, AR, actual reality. It's like, Dad, can I get a VR headset? Like, no, buddy, I got even better. We'll go on an AR whitewater rafting trip. We went to Tennessee.
Like in Pigeon Forge, Smoky Mountains.
Nice. Were you guys out on like the Chattanooga or?
Yeah. Is that in the Pisgah National Forest, I think?
Yeah, maybe so. It's like a massive I mean, it's part of like the Appalachians.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So like, I think I used to live in North Carolina, and they share a border, North Carolina and the Appalachian Mountains, and then Tennessee over there. So you've got the Great Smoky Mountains, and I think the really big park there, like national park, is the Pisgah. If I'm not mistaken, it's where Dollywood is and Pigeon Forge and all that. They're like just nestled inside of there.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't too far from there.
Yeah, those places are cool.
But yeah, my youngest, he was like, I think one of the, I don't know if it was like maybe like a class 3 or class 4 or something. Anyway, it was like one of the big ones, and the guide let him like, and he was, I think 8 or 9 at the time, and he's like, he sat on the front of the boat, like holding the D-rings, going down this, like riding it like down that thing. And I'd had my other knee surgery, like I was in a leg brace, like hobbling onto the boat, and the guy's like, "Are you sure you're gonna be all right?"
You're like, dude, I'm a Navy SEAL. Yeah, I'll be fine. Yeah, I think that river is the Nantahala, as a matter of fact, because if it is, I went whitewater rafting on that too for a Young Life trip back in high school. And then if it's also the same area, dude, this is like one of the, probably should have been way scarier than it was, but I went hiking with my parents in high school. With my brother and I, we were walking like 100 feet up from my parents, and we come around a turn in this park, and there is two bear cubs, just chilling on the trail, and then their mom, like 50 feet behind them. And I was like, oh my gosh, dude. And like looking at my brother's like, don't freaking move. We just need to back up. And the mom like kind of perked up, and we backed up around the corner of the trail. And I was like, Mom, Dad, go that way, because we're going to die. And I just remember, like, it wasn't that crazy, but knowing what I know now about cubs and their mom, I was like, that could have ended up really freaking bad.
Yeah, the bears there are crazy. We stayed at a house, like, right there, like, on the side of a cliff, like, like the hills, mountains, whatever you want to call them. And, like, Christy and I were, like, sitting in the hot tub, and she's like, "Is that a bear over there?" And I was like, "Yep, that's a bear." Like, 10 minutes later, there's, like, 4 of them, like, trying to, like down by the door, like trying to come in, like, shut the doors. The next morning, she's like drinking her coffee, like reading her Bible, sitting there, and she looks over, and there's like a little bear cub that crawled up the side, and she's like, "Oh, what the," like up the side of the porch.
Supposedly there's a lot more bear sightings that are happening here in Texas too. I don't know what's driving that, but my wife forwarded me something to that effect the other day, and I was like, that's interesting. I haven't seen any yet, but you know, they're out there apparently. So you're creating these AR experiences for your boys. Like, is there anything else that you're just like, and they're in jiu-jitsu, you know, they're in the acting academy, and then there's some that, you know, kind of translates them back into school and sports and all that. Like, is there anything else that you just do methodically, like, you know, any other hard things that you kind of do together as a group, or, you know, anything else that's, you know, kind of just, you kind of are intentionally doing to, you know, I guess prepare them for the world?
I mean, I encourage entrepreneurship with them. So, you know, I try not to just like give them money. Again, like we pay for all the stuff they need, but if like, I need to get this, I'm like, okay, you need it. Okay, well, here's some ways you can, you know, work for it. Like an example, my oldest, when he was 9 years old or 10 years old, he's like, "Dad, can I get an iPhone?" And I said, "Well, I don't see why not. I mean, it's America. I guess you could get an iPhone." He goes, "Oh, when can I get one?" I said, "Well, I guess whenever you have enough money to buy one." So he's like, "Well, how am I going to do that?" And I'm like, "Well, there's a lawnmower right there, and there's a bunch of houses that look like they could use their grass mowed." And he's like, "Oh, well, what would I?" And I said, "Okay, here's what you do. Go knock on the door. Say, 'Hi, sir, ma'am. My name is Maverick, and I've been thinking about my life. I've decided I don't want to waste it all playing video games, so I'm trying to make something of myself and learn the value of work. Is there any way I could mow your yard today?'"
Oh my gosh! It's like, how do they even say? How can they say no? They can't.
2 weeks later, he's like, "All right, Dad, I got enough money to buy an iPhone." So he gets it, and he's like, "Dad, it doesn't work. I need service." I'm like, "Well, how are you going to buy that?" And my wife's like, she's like, "We can get him service." Now, my other 10-year-old, he will not be getting an iPhone. But I think it's important, like, teaching them to, like, work for stuff. Again, with my middle one right now, like, we're working on basically, you know, being gym buddies. Like, you know, he's wants to go work out. So, you know, I think a lot of it's, you know, as parents, you know, at least for myself, whenever it's like, I'm just dad, and it's like, don't do this, don't do that. like, I think that's whenever like we get like the most like resistance and like rebellion. But it's like whenever I can go in and like connect and like sow into him like and like a person to person level, like some of those other things just kind of like work themselves out, because it's not just, I think it's, you know, it's hard being a dad. You know, whenever it's like, okay, hey, don't do this, don't do that, you're in trouble. And the kids, like, they just see you as like an authority figure. So I think it's important, like, okay, how can we like connect in a way outside of that? So you can see like, oh, like dad's actually kind of cool. Like, hey, he's going to help me do this thing. So it's like, if you can, I think if they like build that trust, like helping them do something, you know, whether it's like working out or like, hey, what are you interested in? Helping them do that. So that's what I'm working on right now is, you know, working out with him. That's what he wanted to do. He was kind of, my middle one was like burnt out on jiu-jitsu. He's like, I don't want to go. So it was kind of like me forcing him to go. So that's again like butting heads. So I'm like, okay, what do you want? I want to work out. I'm like, okay, well, let's go do that.
What are the factors that go into where like you actually allow them to step outside of that? Because I think a lot of people, you know, at least I grew up in a household where like, you know, I wasn't allowed to quit anything, and it didn't matter how much it sucked. Like I had to stay in it. And so like, how do you balance that out? Because there is a point where that's actually not good. Like there can be things that like where someone, you know, it's not a good situation for somebody to be participating in something anymore. But like, you know, kind of how do you work through that with them?
So I think for me, it would, you know, like it depends on the kid and depends on their age, right? It's, you know, and again, like with our first kid, you know, when he was little, he was like, you know, super well behaved, like respectful, all these things. So we'd go to a restaurant and he's like got manners and quiet, and we're like the best parents ever, right? And we look at other people and like, these people need to get their kids under control. Then we had our second one and we're like, again, great kid, but totally different, right? Like this kid, he completed the cinnamon challenge when he was like 6 years old, like where you eat a spoonful. It's like completed it. Like, wow. I've never seen anyone do this. Like this kid will be unstoppable. I just got to get him pointed in the right direction. But he threw us for a loop, and we're like, okay, scratch that. We didn't know what we were talking about. But when they're little, right, and they're like, oh, Dad, I want to sign up for, you know, flag football. Oh, I want to do jiu-jitsu. And I'd say like they're, you know, middle school and younger. You know, a lot of times when they're like, oh, I don't want to go to practice today. I don't want to do that. Like most of the time, like that is a like symptom of distraction, right? So they're distracted by like a video game or something they're doing right now, and they're like, oh, I'm doing this right now. As soon as you get them off that and you get them to practice, like they have a great time. So it's like, oh, was it fun? Oh yeah, practice was awesome today. You're like, okay, cool. So even with, you know, my youngest son, he's like, oh, I don't want to go to baseball. I'm like, well, too bad. I'm coaching the team. You're going. So, and then he gets there and he has a great time. He's like, oh, that was great. I hit a home run and all this. With my older ones, like they wanted to play football. They were playing football. And again, like they're, you know, not 6'4", 220 pounds, right? So you're like, you know, you're not going to the NFL, right? It's like highly unlikely, or even college or varsity in high school. You know, they're good athletes, but it's like he's like, all right, Dad, I'm going to be like C team. And I'm like, you know, I left it up to him. I'm like, hey, would you rather like invest your time in something where you're going to get a return on it? Or do you want to spend all your time doing that? Where, I mean, there is some return, like you're learning, you know, hard work, you're getting in shape, like there's some camaraderie, like there's some positive aspects, but dude, that's like up to you. So I wouldn't necessarily let them like quit in the middle of something. For that, like take like a jiu-jitsu tournament. Wyatt went and competed, and he like just smoked his forearms in like the first match. He's like, oh, I think I'm done, Dad. I'm like, no, you're not. You got like 4 more matches. He goes, he loses a couple, gets in another division. He's like, Dad, I literally have nothing left. He like goes and throws up. I'm like, dude, like you have another match. Like you got to dig deep. Like get out there and get it. And he went out there and freaking guillotined this kid in like 14 seconds. He was like, yes, like standing on the podium. So I don't know. I'd say it's not like a never let your kids quit, and it's not a always let them quit, right? I think there's like a happy medium in there. But I think it's like more like for me when I was growing up, it's like, all right, you can play one sport at a time, and if you start, like you're not allowed to quit, right? And I think wasn't necessarily a bad rule. I think a lot of times it's like we get kind of overcommitted, right? With like, oh, we're going to play baseball and football and do jiu-jitsu and do all these other things where you're just running around like crazy.
Right on. So there's one more question that I definitely want to make sure we ask, and we usually ask at the beginning. And I think I was so excited about the other stuff we're going to talk about, just flew right by it. But I'd like to ask everybody, like, what is your definition of a patriot?
It's a good question. I don't know. I'd say, I was fortunate to be born in this country, and even more fortunate to be born in Texas. And, my parents raised me to, were very patriotic, raised me to, love our country. And I think it was JFK said don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So I always felt blessed to live in this country. And for me, like, being a patriot meant, like, whenever I heard the call, like, I answered it. So, like, when 9/11 happened, like, I definitely heard the call, like, it was my time to serve, and I went. So I'd say, like, being a patriot is, what can you do to make your country better, your community better, your family better? And I think, like, those things, like, collectively, even, like, at the family unit, like, if you can just, like, change the thinking in your household, in your community, and we, like, collectively do that, I think we fundamentally change the direction of our country.
Nice. I like that.
And kind of right back to the thinking part. No, this is great, man. I really appreciate you hopping on with us today. Adam, do you have anything else, or Chad, is there anything that we didn't talk about? I guess one thing would be great to know is so you've got you have Young Athlete's Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness. That's one of the books that people can find on Amazon. If they were wanting to find any of your other books, is there any other books that you wanted to mention, or anywhere else people could find you? And
my wife and I co-wrote one together. It's called Teen Confidence Unlocked. So again, a lot of the same principles as in the other book, but it's kind of, written. There's some additional stuff in there. It's not exactly, I mean, you could read both of them and get, totally different kind of things out of them. The first one is really, how do you, like, develop and build mental toughness? And by that, I mean, how do you, like, decide, hey, this is the thing I'm going to do? And how do you get from here to here and, like, stay the course? Right. And then the second one kind of looks at just some of the stuff that, like, either, like, we went through as teenagers, we see our kids going through, other stuff like that. Just kind of like, how do you actually build confidence? And kind of, we talked about some of those ways today. So that's kind of those two books. As far as, like, checking out, like, the next great adventure stuff. I've got stuff on YouTube with, like, links to some of the challenges on there on my YouTube channel. It's just Chad Metcalf. And then on my website, I've also got some, like, free PDFs and, like, free ebooks people can grab. And that's just mentaltoughnessandconfidence.com. And if you go grab some of those, you'll get on my email list, and I'll email you links to, like, some of the free challenges on the next great adventure. And if you jump on those and you find value, like, I'm probably going to roll it out where I get several just kind of challenges, so you can kind of get a taste of what's in the course. And then if you want to sign up for a course, that'll be available sometime in the near future.
Yeah, I had a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about, which means that hopefully there is a second podcast in the works, because I definitely wanted to talk about conspiracies a little bit and some other things. Especially knowing your record's 100%. So just maybe you can prognosticate on what's going to happen, and we can just write it down and be like, all right, on this date, Chad Metcalf predicted this, so we're just going to wait for it to come true.
No, people just think I was a crazy person.
I think after the past few years, regardless of what side people sit on, I think everyone is in full recognition of the fact that there were a good number of things that people were called conspiracy theories that actually did come true. So I think there's that. Yeah,
I mean, people used to think I was a conspiracy theorist for talking about, like, GMO.
Oh man, yeah, that's pretty wild. Yeah, we I helped with a docuseries on that some years back, and it's been pretty interesting to see. Like, you'd still would think that it would be a much bigger deal than it is, but people at least are more aware of it now, and it is definitely not a conspiracy theory. That is very much solidly in the land, living in the land of real.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Like a lot of European countries, like they've completely banned all GMO products, and
they're banning all sorts of stuff over there. GMO products, they're banning a ton of different types of pharmaceutical drugs. Like there was one that made me really sick back in 2020. Or no, that was in 2021 was when COVID made me really, really sick in 2020. And then I took some really bad antibiotics and found out that specific antibiotic had been banned in the UK. And I was like, oh, that's great. Things your doctor will not tell you unless you specifically, do the research yourself or ask. Again, going back to learning how to think for yourself. So, man, Chad, thank you so much for being here with us today. I definitely think there will be another podcast in the works here. But man, true pleasure.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.